Hey there! I'm back with a new chair, new glasses, and an amazing new article that I am so excited to share about. This article has to do with the intersection between autism and the incel community, and I'm just really excited that I was able to find a peer-reviewed article on this topic because it's one of my special interests. Prior to getting into this article, one thing that I always want to say when I'm talking about incels on this page is that being part of the incel community and having an ASD diagnosis are not mutually exclusive. That's something that I want to make very, very clear and adamant whenever discussing things on this page about that. To have autism does not mean that you have to be an incel, and to be an incel does not mean that you have to have autism. There are just some characteristics part of the autism community that make them a little bit more vulnerable to communities such as the incel community. The manosphere, being black pill. This article talks about the intersection between autism, hopelessness, and being part of incel communities, and so I'm really excited to share this. So the article is titled Incels, Autism, and Hopelessness, Affective Incorporation of Online Interaction as a Challenge for Phenomenological Psychopathology. It was written by Sanna Tirkkonen and Daniel Vespermann in December 6 of 2023. The abstract states, recent research has drawn attention to the prevalence of self-reported autism within online communities of involuntary celibates, incels. These studies suggest that some individuals with autism may be particularly vulnerable to the impact of incel forums and the hopelessness they generate. However, a more precise description of the experimental connection between inceldom, self-reported autism, and hopelessness has remained unarticulated. Therefore, this article combines empirical studies on the incel community with phenomenological and embodiment approaches to autism, hopelessness, and online activity. We analyze three interrelated aspects of online interactions in incel communities: worldview, bodily self-relation, and mutual dismissals, and examine how these elements contribute to consolidation of the loss of significant life possibilities. By investigating the potential negative influence of specific online environments on affective dispositions, our approach contributes to the debate on current challenges to situate phenomenological psychopathology. Again, I just really want to reiterate, being an incel and being autistic are not mutually exclusive. People with ASD are just more vulnerable to being part of communities such as this. The article starts by saying, we have seen a rise in phenomenological approaches to autism that acknowledge how neurotypical social contexts negatively shape non-neurotypical formation of experience. However, the potential impact of online interactions has largely been understood as beneficial, whereas the possible negative effects have not been in the focus. About how many autistic adults have found community online, but the negative impacts of these online communities haven't really been studied yet. We analyze self-reported autism and its association with hopelessness in the online communities of involuntary celibates, otherwise known as incels, which is the purpose of the study. Incels, the involuntary aspect is that they have no access to sexual relations, to relationships in general. Many people with physical disabilities would not fall under the category of being an incel. They wouldn't identify as being an incel because what incels differ in is that they can have sex, that they just feel as if they're not able to due to social norms, women's rights, a plethora of reasons. That's kind of the distinction of where it's involuntary, not literally involuntary, more so socially. This set of beliefs originates from a network of online communities known as the manosphere. The manosphere communities promotes a hierarchical understanding of gender relations fostered by specific terminology, pseudoscientific theories, and categorization of human beings based on their looks, wealth, and social status. The black pill refers to an outlook or philosophy according to which men who have certain disadvantages in the dating culture cannot do anything to improve their attractiveness, for example, by changing their behavior or physical appearance. The black pill philosophy argues that physical attractiveness determines men's dating success in Western societies. As a result, incels have given up hope that their alleged disadvantages could be fixed in order to find an intimate partner. This is very different from the red pill community, where they feel as if I just need to work out, I just need to make a lot of money, and this is how I'm gonna get a partner, while incels are much more pessimistic and much more dystopian outlook on life, where because of their genetics, because of this predeterminism that the article starts to go into, these are the reasons why they don't have access to sex, love, happiness. Roughly a quarter of the users of incel forums have reported a formal diagnosis of autism, which I think is really important to state. Autism alone does not make anyone an incel, which is a self-acclaimed cultural category, and violence, radicalization, and hostile attitudes towards women cannot be explained by autism. I just feel like that's always a really important clarification, and I think the study does a really good job reiterating that throughout the article. That we are particularly interested in the aggravation of hopelessness in these forums. Our research combines empirical study on incels' self-reported autism with current advances in the phenomenology of autism, hopelessness, and online affectivity. In the podcast series Incel, an interviewee named Kay describes his own situation and the connection between inceldom and autism as follows. Quote, "It was impossible for me to get a connection with girls and women. At that time, I didn't know why that was. And then I always tried to find a girlfriend, and I told myself if I don't find a girlfriend when I'm 18, I'm gonna kill myself because I'm losing, I'm failing. Everybody around me has a girlfriend. Everyone around me is having sex. I lost a ton of weight, I improved my looks, and I tried to do that, but the issue is that was for nothing. You know why? Because as it turned out, I have autism. I'm on the autism spectrum. And this causes me so much pain and trouble during high school, during college, and this is the main reason why I am an incel." You could see that through this quote, a lot of pain, a lot of sadness, and like a true loss of hope. This passage describes from the first person perspective how late diagnosed autism is perceived as the main explanatory factor for the inability to form intimate relationships. It also captures the psychological distress the person is going through, suicidal thoughts, feelings of failure in a highly normative social setting, and grief at losing the type of life one had envisioned for themselves. Because of this is why I'm really into early diagnosis, because early diagnosis then allows for early intervention, where then we can start to mitigate some of the negative effects that masking could be associated with, especially in late diagnosed autistic adults. For kids who just thought that they were weird and they had to figure out how to get through, and then now as an adult they are finding out that they had a late autistic diagnosis. They don't know how to socialize, they don't know how to date, they're having much difficulty because these are things that at a young age the kids or cohort were doing naturally, but to them they didn't know how to do it, and so they just thought that they were weird instead of having resources to be able to do those things as well. Empirical studies still often refer to autism spectrum disorder, ASD. According to the standard definition, autism is not a mental disorder, but a neurodevelopmental condition that typically manifests in early childhood. As we are dealing with a spectrum, the autistic traits vary in their severity and quality. They often involve difficulties in social interaction, communication, and may include repetitive patterns of behavior, a preference for routine and predictability, and sometimes intense special interests. These different characteristics are attractive to the incel community because it allows for different means of social interaction, a lot of different forms of predictability, and they get to it's an echo chamber. And if being an incel, if the manosphere is your special interest, of course you're going to be a part of it, right? In addition to ASD, depression and anxiety are significantly higher amongst the incel participants compared to the American adult population. Studies thus make a clear distinction between self-reported psychological problems and formal diagnoses made by healthcare professionals. For example, Moskalenko surveyed the mental health of 278 participants who self-identified as incels. Of their participants, 95% reported experiencing depression, 94% anxiety, and 74% some autism spectrum traits. When the participants were asked about a formal diagnosis, 37% reported depression, 37% reported anxiety, and 18% reported autism disorder. There seems to be a lot more self-diagnosis than clinical diagnosis when it comes to being in these incel forums. Several studies have also addressed the question of the extent to which the violent behavior of certain incels and autisms can be associated. Some studies argue that perceiving incels as violent and misogynistic terrorists only increase their stigmatization, even though the majority of incels do not exhibit violent traits. That's why I love this article, because it really humanizes the incel community, the manosphere, okay? Not all of them are dangerous, not all of them are violent, a lot of them are agoraphobic, a lot of them have autistic traits, and so they're trying to find their way in the world. Violent behavior of certain incels does not generalize the entire autism community. More specifically, a minority of incels do embrace violence, glorify incel killers, fantasize about rape, and belittle its consequences. These attitudes, emotional responses, and patterns of thought are intensified in these forums. Accordingly, the forums may function as negative echo chambers, particularly those who already have difficulties in communicating with others. You could have these really niche interests, not a lot of people want to talk about it outside. All of a sudden you find these online communities where all they want to talk about is that, and so everyone's just bouncing off ideas and it becomes more negative, more pessimistic, more violent, and all of a sudden you're trapped. These are the people that you associate with. That's why this is really important to do research on, because I feel that a lot of people potentially with autistic traits could fall victim to being part of these negative echo chambers of hate, of violence, of misogyny, which they otherwise wouldn't have been a part of. In the survey by Speckard et al., the majority of incels, 54.4%, reported that these specific online forums make them feel hopeless. In general, hopelessness is highlighted in the first-person narratives of autistic people who struggle with interpersonal dynamics, but observe that socially skillful individuals are always the popular ones. Incels and those with autism have a higher likelihood of experiencing hopelessness. Similarly, the possibility of ever having intimate relations is characterized as being over for those on the spectrum, and adopting the black pill ideology only deepens these feelings of hopelessness. A lot of autistic adults, individuals in general, deal with black and white thinking, and if X, Y, and Z isn't the case, then X, Y, and Z must be the case, right? If they feel as if they're not tall enough, they're not attractive enough, then they're never going to be able to have a relationship. If they feel as if that because they have an autism diagnosis, they're never going to be able to have a relationship. Why these black pill ideology only deepens these feelings of hopelessness, because there's no way to really look for the future in this mentality. The next section of this article talks about phenomenological approaches to autism, bodily attunement, and situationness. So basically, after talking about autism and incels, they zoom out a little bit and talks about advances in the phenomenology of autism. Phenomenological approaches to autism have challenged the prevailing ways of defining autism as a deficiency of cognitive functioning, as a failure to understand the mental states of oneself and others. Instead, phenomenologists have argued that difficulties in interacting with neurotypical others stems from a different way of being bodily attuned to the environment and expressive gestures of others. Autism is not a cognitive deficiency, but it's just a different way of interacting with the environment and with others. Second, the differences between neurotypical and autistic experiences of interaction that take place at the pre-reflexive level. Oren Bader and Thomas Funch have argued, for example, that those with ASC have difficulties in gestalt perception, which unites the gestures, attitudes, and behaviors of others into a meaningful whole in light of the overall situation. Third, it is not unusual for people on the autism spectrum to go through deliberate, laborious cognitive processes in social situations to find social meaning. High-functioning autistic people employ cognitive strategies to compensate for their difficulties in adapting to neurotypical ways of being attuned to gestures of other people. So this is masking, coping, making sense of pain. Incels on the spectrum often recognize that they struggle to engage in neurotypical patterns of interaction, and therefore seek ways to make sense of its implicit rules and try to explain how intimate relationships are formed. The black pill theory, with its categorizations and rankings of attractiveness and social desirability, can thus be understood as one of the strategic means of trying to grasp and organize the social cues implicit in neurotypical behavior. Incel forums are attracted to those with ASD because it gives them structure, strategic means of trying to grasp and organize the social cues. It helps them make sense of their lived experience. 4. Kruger and Ahmed describe a social space disorientation, which refers to a felt sense of not finding one's way in social interaction. They then describe two forms of disorientation: epistemic and bodily affective. Bodily affective disorientation refers to the above described difficulties of being bodily attuned to the neurotypical others, fitting into their world, and identifying the emotions that this disattunement may involve. How I interpreted this was basically ways of how to be normal at a party. Like, that could be an example of it. Epistemic disorientation, in turn, refers to a major shift in one's core beliefs, which can have a significant effect on the ways in which one finds oneself in the world and interprets social interactions and one's relationship with others. I interpreted this as either falling in or out of religion. The manosphere helps with this disorientation because it provides direction and predictability, which is really relieving for somebody who may struggle with that. After arriving at this newfound enlightenment about how things really are, the former belief system seems delusional and uninformed, and it appears to benefit only those with the right physical attributes, status, and power to find sexual and intimate partners. Kruger argues that bodily affective and epistemic disorientation do not necessarily occur together, but in the case of incels, the distinction between them is not clear-cut. Online environments are thus presented in a positive light as spaces of mutual recognition and acceptance, where non-neurotypical persons can also feel comfortable and at home. However, what is still lacking is phenomenological studies on autism in a critical analysis of the negative effects of online environments on one's self-perception and felt possibilities of forming relationships. The article then goes into intentional and radical hopelessness. Several empirical studies on incels mention hopelessness as a significant dimension of their experience. The incel vocabulary sometimes differentiates between three strategies for living through the pain of not being able to form intimate relationships: hope, cope, and rope. The black pill philosophy rejects a hopeful outlook on life, particularly any advice that aims at self-improvement or individual healing. That's why I previously talked about the difference between like the red pill, because in black pill, there's no hope. They reject all of that. Those who simply try to accept their situation without challenging the prevalent social norms are easily labeled as copes, which has a pejorative meaning. And then rope in turn refers to suicide. A number of studies have investigated the posts on suicide in the forums and noted that suicidal ideations also encourage others to carry them out in practice. The rope posts are characterized by overall hopelessness in terms of improving one's life situation or finding a romantic or sexual partner. Furthermore, a study by Williams and Arntfield, focusing exclusively on homicidal incels, has shown that they not only experience hopelessness in one sphere of life and intimate relationships, but in multiple areas of their everyday lives, including family relations, employment, and social connections in general. You could just see that there's a lot of hopelessness in these spaces. It is often the case that incels who are prone to violence have also suffered from significant losses. Before we can really understand what it means to be hopeless, we have to understand what it means to lose it, and then also what it is to even have it to begin with. There are two types of hope: intentional and pre-intentional. Intentional hope is commonly defined by some variation of the so-called standard account, according to which hope is understood as a combination of the desirability of P and a belief in some degree of the probability of P. If I do this, hopefully this will happen. Now, in contrast, pre-intentional hope implies a sense of having possibilities at all. I interpreted this as, can anything good happen? And to be a human, we all hope to find love, and that's just an intrinsic experience. Hopelessness is really important to understand in this context because a person can go through many years, many instances of intentional hope being declined, and though it's uncomfortable, they can get through it. Somebody trying to ask for somebody's number, they did get declined. Trying to get invited to a party, they get dissed. Bullying, all those different things. Intentional hope could be lost, but it could be lost multiple times. Pre-intentional hope, though, is when it gets really important and gets really dangerous, because if a person loses the ability to hope at all, the thought that if anything good could happen in general, that's a very scary place to be, in my opinion. Radcliffe characterizes the deepest form of loss as the absence of the capacity to hope for anything combined with a lack of awareness that anything has been lost. They deprive the future of significant possibilities, and that's where that pre-intentional hope really comes into play, where it's like they can't even think about things in the future being possible because what even is hope at that point? This concept of cultural life scripts, which are basically a set of life events that are expected to take place and be experienced in the course of a normal life. You could expect prom, losing your virginity, going on dates, going to bars. Importantly, as these norms are socio-cultural in origin, not feeling capable of completing these milestones will be experienced as having consequences for social connections in general. In societies in which marriage and having a family are understood as default steps in one's life, failing to find a partner might feel like, and to some extent actually amount to, social isolation. One is essentially excluded from numerous social opportunities in which having a partner or child is a tactic or factual requirement. In feeling desynchronized with regard to a certain cultural life script, we might feel out of sync with others in general and thus deprived of a conventional set of social possibilities. If you feel like you can't be included in these specific life scripts because you don't have a partner, right? You can't go on a double date if you don't have somebody to go on the date with. If you aren't able to be part of these specific life scripts, you can feel extremely isolated, and it could be like a never-ending cycle of isolation, missing out on these life scripts, isolation, and it just continues. In the incel community, the once lived hope of having a romantic or sexual partner is turned into a permanent loss. An identity of being excluded from society and deprived of recognition by others due to not conforming to the presupposed norms of masculinity. This can cause really intense embarrassment, and so for some people, when they're really embarrassed, they obviously can become very sad, but some people can get very scary and angry when they feel embarrassed. Given the distinctions just presented, we can see that black-pilled hopelessness, and in particular the rope option, is compatible with some type of fundamental hopelessness, which is a loss of hope for bettering oneself or improving one's life, otherwise known as a loss of a sense of one's future as a dimension of hope. And that's really sad. Scientific determinism as a hallmark of black pill ideology. The incel community knows two ways of taking the black pill, philosophically and scientifically. So far, we've talked about the philosophical aspect of it, where it's losing hope, not feeling like you can find your place in the world, not always being rejected. But now, what really is a attractive part of the manosphere and the incel ideology specifically is the scientific, statistical math aspect that makes it feel factual. The incel community delves into scientific data supposedly backing up the rather speculative ideas of the general black pill philosophy. According to scientific black pilling, psychological processes are exclusively governed by evolutionary functions deprived of others, motivational factors than biologically defined self-interest. Ultimately, these functions are exhaustively determined by genetic dispositions, and any potential romantic encounter thus becomes a mere phenotypical expression contingent upon those dispositions. For incels, it's really easy math. Good genes equals having a girl. Bad genes equals not having a girl equals being alone forever, which equals obviously hopelessness. For some with ASD, this scientific determinism within the incel community helps them make sense of the world. So the article suggests that a tendency toward deterministic self-understanding may express a compensatory coping strategy related to specific cognitive traits common to many people with autism. Recent findings suggest that autistic people often have difficulties with episodic future thinking or future-oriented mental time travel. They may struggle a little bit with thinking of things in the future, planning for long-term impacts of things, and so black pilling further diminishes the felt sense of agency in interacting with others, because hope is future-oriented, and if autistic people struggle with the future aspects, the incel determinism, thus, even though pessimistic, begets orientation, and that is thus comforting. In incel communities, outward appearance becomes by far the dominant factor in being able to form romantic relationships. What constitutes so-called sexual market value, or SMV, is exclusively conditioned by physiognomic features. The underlying tendency to operationalize and predict mating success with physiognomic features consequently amounts to a decimal ranking system of sexual attractiveness. Some community members share photos of themselves to be assessed and classified by other incels. This is like the most extreme form of rating somebody from 1 through 10. And they'll post photos of themselves in these forums so that other members can rate them. And these ratings are always so mean. They're never saying that, oh, you look good, I like what you're doing with your hair. They're tearing each other down when they're trying to talk about their own looks. The lack of social relationships outside of online interactions might lead to body image relations being disproportionately important for one's bodily self-realization. We don't have a lot of outside interactions. Obviously, the opinions of those online may mean a lot to us. If one's self-perception is grounded in a highly negative and ultimately unattractive body image, this will reduce the conceivability of scenarios in which one could be a romantic partner for someone and severely restrict the range of particular intentional hopes. If you feel as if not only you don't have a lot of friends on the outside that you're able to talk to, so you have this one community of individuals where you're able to talk and you share photos of yourselves and they're just bashing you, they're telling you how ugly you look, they're just saying you're never gonna get a girl, and you start to believe them. How then are you going to have the hope, the confidence to make that different, right? To try to go out and actually go on a date. You're not gonna feel incentivized to, you're not gonna feel the hope needed to have the confidence to go forth and try doing that thing, because you just have been reinforced again and again that you're probably not going to because of how unattractive you are. And you also have a plethora of evidence on these forums showing you statistically why you're unattractive. It's really dangerous. It's really bad. The body image, per this article, refers to a set of perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes towards one's body that is from a third-person perspective. Oneself is linked with how we interact with the environment and with others. The explicit self-relation via body image is intimately connected with the body schema as an implicit sensory motor orientation. The way that we can know that we are us, that we can engage with our self-image, is through pictures, through mirrors, through touching ourselves, through somebody touching ourselves. Those are the ways in which we're able to further perceive ourselves in the world. As a consequence, this bodily self also emerges from evaluations implicit in the body image, such as social relations or size, that interact with arousal and motivational states resulting from the felt bodily dimension. Literally, how we understand and experience the world is impacted by others. Notably, findings in autism research suggest that it is common in autism to have difficulties in sensing and interpreting bodily signals. For example, whether one is hungry or why one's heart is racing. By stipulation, this would be tantamount to a literal incorporation of hopelessness, right? So those with ASD in these forums could be literally consuming hopelessness through the statistical evidence that shows that they're unattractive and that they're not going to be able to have a partner in the future. It could literally mess with how they understand and perceive themselves in the world, and that's super concerning. In addition, several studies suggest a significant relationship between autistic traits and indices of negative body images. In some, findings on interoceptive difficulties in autistic people, on negative body image in autism, and research indicating a negative correlation between interoceptive awareness and self-objectification culminate in the hypothesis that a constantly evoked negative body image reduces the sense of agency. Such a reduced sense of agency in turn speaks to a bodily felt dimension of hopelessness. That makes perfect sense as to why these negative echo chambers that incel communities create can just foster a endless cycle and endless feeling of negative body image feelings. It increases the hopelessness, right? It just does. A number of studies suggest that incels immunize themselves instead against any prospect of alleviating their condition. Anyone who would provide encouragement or comfort lacks understanding and is considered a normie, which is irreconcilable with being a member of the incel community. In addition, incels who seek to change their situation are accused of having red pill behavior and lying about their incel status. As stated previously, red pillers believe if we work out, if we make a lot of money, if we wear nice clothes, if we smell good, all of these different things are going to provide us success, wealth, and status, right? While to be an incel, you're pessimistic, you're very negative, you don't believe that any of those things are possible, and you have evidence to back it up. In the online communities, therapy is discussed in a very negative light as a scam in form of social control. In their view, therapists only sell platitudes that hide a demand to follow the norms of mainstream culture. To them, why would they go to a therapist? Because why would I go to a normie who's then trying to make me a normie? That's where their mentality comes from. Instead of providing support and offering the possibility to make sense of one's distress, the peculiar social dynamic upholds a state of hopelessness through repeated mutual dismissals and by simultaneously fostering the feeling of belonging. They hate each other, but they find comfort in their solidarity. And that's why when they post their photos, they're really mean when they're reading each other, but they keep doing it. I guess it could be either cathartic, it could be comforting, but they're not providing support in the typical way one would understand support. And we know this because it spews hopelessness, while normal support, typical support, provides feelings of hope. Of course, this is not to say that the higher likelihood of specific traits accumulating in autistic people is directly related to the adoption of an incel ideology. It is simply to say that these traits might pose difficulties when it comes to navigating neurotypical environments, and at the same time be highly compatible with forging social bonds online and in incel forums in particular. Exactly. That's why I really like this article, because it's not saying that to be autistic means you have to be a part of the incel community or vice versa. It's just that a lot of these traits have the possibility of succumbing to online social bonds such as these incel communities. So taking the black pill promises a scientifically sound worldview that explains the experienced predicament of establishing social connections in a neurotypical environment, especially when it comes to finding romantic partners. Sadly, it's ironic because the deeper an incel gets on into these forums and believes the ideology, the deeper and more difficult it is for them to actually make social connections in the outside world. It's a never-ending cycle, right? So like the more entrenched they are into these communities, the more difficult it is for them to have friends offline. The fundamental loss of hope and its implications for felt social possibilities tap into the particular vulnerabilities of people who already have difficulties in establishing social connections, like those on the autism spectrum. Although we do not claim that the interactions described here necessarily exacerbate the mental health situations of autistic people, we hypothesize that adopting an attitude of radical hopelessness will place considerable constraints on fostering social connections beyond the specific community. Exactly. It doesn't matter. Not all social communities are good. If we're all connected through hopelessness, that's not a good social connection. And for those who struggle with forming social connections, they can succumb to these types of groups. And that's really unfortunate and that's really unfair. We do not deny the conditions such as depression or anxiety, both very common in incel communities, could also be linked to feelings of hopelessness. We do not base our hypothesis on factual diagnoses, but focus more broadly on autism-related traits commonly recognized in the research literature. Moreover, we do not claim that all autistic people are inclined to join incel communities. And I love the fact that they just keep reiterating that autistic people, they're not more inclined to join incel communities, but for the traits, there's a likelihood of it. And that's concerning, and that's why it needs to be researched. And then lastly, the authors just wanted to state that the purpose of the study was to analyze the experimental connections between autism and hopelessness in online forums for involuntary celibates, otherwise known as incels. I thought this was an absolutely amazing article. I really appreciated their constant emphasis on the fact that it's not a mutually exclusive relationship between incels and being in the autism community, but the commonality of hopelessness is really attractive in both, and it intersects in a way that could be really damaging and be really negative. Thank you so much for watching. I loved reading this. I hope I could find more like this, and yeah, that's it.